see his hand coming up like this. I drew my weapon at that time, and I shot through the windshield and shot the right shoulder. I yelled, "Don't move again." And that's when I saw flashes. He had his window rolled up, and I saw these yellow flashes like this, and then I heard the sound, and I felt the piercing pain right through my stomach. And that's when I fired the 3 fatal shots. I fired 3 more shots, and I know it was in the head area.
Huntsville, Texas, February 29th, 2012. The room is cold, clinical, and silent. On the gurney lies George Angel Rivas Jr., 41 years old, the man who once masterminded one of the most notorious prison breaks in American history. Leather straps bite against his arms and legs. A needle is already in place, clear tubing leading to the chemicals that will stop his heart. Behind the glass, there are 2 sets of eyes. On one side, the family of a fallen police officer, waiting for justice. On the other, the wife Rivas, married by proxy, holding on to the last fragments of a man about to be erased. When the warden gives the signal, Rivas lifts his head slightly and speaks. His voice is calm, almost steady, but the words are heavy. "I do apologize for everything that happened. Not because I'm here, but for closure in their hearts. I know it was a loss that was totally unnecessary.
I held no malice towards him. And I didn't want him to die."
At 6:22 p.m., the drugs begin to flow. Within minutes, the leader of the Texas 7 is gone. But how did a boy from El Paso, sentenced to spend his life behind bars, become the ringleader of the most dangerous prison escape Texas had ever seen? To understand this ending, we have to go back. George Angel Rivas Jr. was born on May 6, 1970, in El Paso, Texas. His childhood wasn't the headline of poverty or abuse that often explains the path of future criminals. Friends would later say he was smart, resourceful, even likable. But somewhere along the line, choices stacked against him. By his 20s, Rivas wasn't just a man drifting into trouble. He was leading it. Armed robberies, aggravated kidnappings, burglaries across El Paso. Crimes that escalated in violence and sophistication. The courts handed down sentence after sentence. 17 life terms, stacked so he would never see freedom again. And yet, behind prison walls, George Rivas found purpose. Not in rehabilitation, but in leadership. At the John B. Connally Unit, a maximum security prison near Kenedy, Texas, he met 6 other inmates. Men serving long stretches of time. Men who, like him, had little to lose. Joseph Garcia, Randy Halpern, Larry Harper, Patrick Murphy, Jr. Donald Newbury, Michael Rodriguez. Together, they would become known as the Texas 7. For Rivas, the story of his life wasn't over when the cell doors clanged shut. In his mind, it was just beginning. December 13th, 2000. Inside the John B. Connally Unit, the air is thick with routine. Guards walk their shifts, maintenance crews handle tools, and in the prison yard, men in white uniforms mill about as if nothing is unusual. But beneath that quiet rhythm, George Rivas is moving pieces into place. For weeks, he has studied schedules, learned the blind spots, and tested the patience of guards. He knows who works in the maintenance shop, which keys open which doors, and what uniforms look like when worn with authority. Every detail matters. For Rivas, this isn't desperation, it's choreography. By mid-afternoon, the plan begins. The first step, lure civilian maintenance workers into a trap. One by one, men are overpowered, tied, gagged, and hidden out of sight. Guards follow next, tricked into entering rooms they won't walk out of freely. Each captive stripped of clothes, radios, and ID cards. The uniforms, now weapons of disguise. The prisoners work quickly, coordinated as if rehearsed. Larry Harper stands watch. Patrick Murphy handles communication. Michael Rodriguez, trusted by Rivas, helps with restraints. Every man has a role, but all eyes still follow one leader, George Rivas. With their captives secured, the group moves on the prison armory. Guns, ammunition, handguns, shotguns, AR-15 rifles. The kind of firepower convicts aren't supposed to touch. Now in their hands, the balance of power shifts. Still dressed as maintenance staff, the 7 men blend into the flow of the facility. They move toward the gates, pushing carts, carrying tools, even chatting like workers finishing their shift. No alarms, no suspicion. Their final step, the maintenance truck. Hidden compartments in the back serve as cover. The keys turn, the engine roars to life, and the gates that should have held them forever open one last time. By dusk, the Texas 7 vanish into the South Texas landscape. One of the most secure prisons in the state has just been breached. And at the heart of it all is George Rivas, the architect of escape, convinced that outside those walls a new life can be carved from crime. Do you think this was genius? Or simply a time bomb waiting to explode? Freedom does not bring peace. It brings hunger, paranoia, and the need for money. The Texas 7 are fugitives, but they are also armed, organized, and desperate. Their days blur into stolen cars, roadside motels, and whispered plans. They rob to survive, convenience stores, small businesses, whatever will keep them moving. At first it feels like triumph. The system humiliated, the state embarrassed. But soon every news broadcast carries their faces. America's Most Wanted puts their story on national TV. They aren't ghosts anymore. They're targets. December 24th, 2000, Christmas Eve. In Irving, Texas, the group sets its sights on Oshman's Sporting Goods. The store is stocked with cash, weapons, and supplies. Everything they believe they need to keep running. The plan is simple. Move in fast, control the employees, empty the registers, and leave armed with new firepower. Inside, workers are tied, bound with duct tape, pushed to the ground. Rifles and handguns line the counters. For Rivas, this is survival dressed as opportunity. But outside, someone is watching. A call comes in to Irving Police. Officer Aubrey Hawkins, just 29 years old, answers. It's Christmas Eve, and he's on duty while his family prepares dinner without him. He drives toward the store, unaware that 7 armed men are waiting inside. When Hawkins arrives, the silence shatters. The gang erupts. Gunfire tears through the air. More than a dozen rounds. Hawkins is struck 11 times. In seconds, he is overwhelmed, his body collapsing to the asphalt.
And I felt the piercing pain right through my stomach. And that's when I fired the 3 fatal shots. I fired 3 more shots, and I know it was in the head area.
As the men scramble into a stolen Ford Explorer, Hawkins' body is dragged beneath their vehicle. The brutality is staggering. A young officer killed on Christmas Eve, his family left waiting at home. The shock ignites fury across Texas. What began as a daring escape is now a blood feud between the fugitives and the entire law enforcement community. By Christmas morning, the Texas 7 are no longer just escapees. They are cop killers, and the manhunt escalates into one of the largest in U.S. history. Across the state, every roadblock tightens. Tips pour in. The FBI, Texas Rangers, and local police coordinate in a hunt that stretches across borders. The fugitives try to keep moving, but the walls are closing in. Still, Rivas pushes forward. He insists they can outlast the law if they stay together, if they keep fighting. But every robbery, every move, puts them further under the spotlight. The cracks in leadership begin to show. What drives men to kill rather than run? Is it survival, or the arrogance of believing they can beat the system forever? January 2001. For more than a month, the Texas 7 have been ghosts. Their faces are plastered across television screens, their names repeated on nightly news. The reward for their capture grows with every day on the run. America's watching, Texas is seething, and law enforcement is closing in. The break comes in Colorado, in a small trailer park near Woodland Park. The 7 men have been posing as Christian missionaries, blending in with neighbors by calling themselves the faithful pilgrims. They read scripture, speak of redemption, and wear the mask of men who found God. But behind that mask lies stolen guns, stolen cars, and the memory of Officer Aubrey Hawkins' murder. On January 21st, the charade cracks. A tip leads authorities straight to their hideout. Police and federal agents descend, surrounding the trailers. For the first time since Connally Unit, the fugitives are trapped. Inside, panic spreads. Larry Harper refuses to be taken alive. As negotiators call out to him, he places a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. 1 life ended by his own hand, 6 others still cornered. The rest of the group, including George Rivas, surrenders. After weeks of outsmarting the system, the mastermind is once again in chains. The irony is heavy. The man who walked out of a maximum security prison by cunning now shuffles back into custody without firing a shot. The arrests make headlines across the nation. To the families of law enforcement, it feels like relief. To the family of Officer Hawkins, it is not enough. Because capture is only the beginning. Justice still waits in the courtroom. Was surrender a sign of regret, or just the last move of a man who ran out of options? Back in Texas, the trial of George Rivas becomes the state's chance to deliver justice. The charges are clear: capital murder for his role in the killing of Officer Aubrey Hawkins. The prosecution spares no detail. They call Rivas the mastermind, the ringleader whose vision turned 6 other inmates into accomplices of destruction. They show how he orchestrated the Connally Unit escape, how he directed the Oshman's robbery, and how, under his leadership, an officer was ambushed and gunned down. Witnesses recount the brutality. Hawkins hit by 11 bullets, his body dragged under a stolen SUV. The image of a young officer dying on Christmas Eve leaves the jury with little room for doubt. The defense tries to soften the picture. They argue Rivas never intended to kill, that his goal was escape, not bloodshed. They remind the jury that it was a chaotic firefight, 7 men with guns, no clear evidence of whose bullet was fatal. But intent matters less when the law sees leadership as responsibility. In Texas, if you plan the crime that kills, you carry the weight of the death. The jury takes little time. In 2001, George Rivas is convicted of capital murder. His sentence, death by lethal injection, and he is not alone. Michael Rodriguez would later waive appeals and be executed in 2008. Donald Newberry would follow in 2015. Joseph Garcia in 2018. Patrick Murphy and Randy Halpern remain on death row. Larry Harper, the only one not to face trial, lies in the grave he dug himself with a trigger pull in Colorado. The Texas 7, once symbols of defiance, are now symbols of failure. For Officer Hawkins' family, the convictions bring some closure, but never enough. For Texas, the trials mark the end of one of the most embarrassing prison escapes in its history. And for George Rivas, the countdown begins, 11 years ticking toward the execution chamber. Huntsville Unit, February 29, 2012. The countdown that began in a Dallas courtroom ends here. The chamber is quiet, sterile, a place designed for finality. George Rivas lies strapped to the gurney, the weight of his choices pressed into every leather restraint. On one side of the glass, Officer Aubrey Hawkins' family watches. 11 years have passed since Christmas Eve took their son, their brother, their husband. On the other side sits Rivas' wife, married by proxy while he waited on death row. The warden signals. Rivas lifts his head. His last words fall into the silence. I do apologize for everything that happened. Not because I'm here, but for closure in their hearts. I know it was a loss that was totally unnecessary. At 6:22 p.m., the lethal chemicals flow. Within minutes, the leader of the Texas 7 is gone. A man who once escaped walls built to hold him forever, now meeting the one barrier he cannot outmaneuver. Do you think remorse at the end matters? Or is it always too late? The Texas 7 escape remains one of the darkest chapters in Texas prison history, a blueprint of audacity, failure, and blood. George Rivas was not the first man to dream of freedom, but his plan turned into a spree that left families shattered and a community grieving. Officer Aubrey Hawkins was 29 years old, with a wife and a young son waiting at home for Christmas dinner. His absence is the measure of the crime, the shadow that lingers long after the gang's bravado faded. The story of George Rivas is not just about one escape, one robbery, or one execution. It is about leadership bent toward destruction, about charisma used to lure others deeper into violence. It is about the illusion that breaking free from walls means you've escaped accountability. In the end, the state of Texas closed the chapter the only way it could, with a needle, a final breath, and a name etched in history for the wrong reasons. If you had the choice, would life in a cell have been punishment enough, or did justice demand that George Rivas die? Let me know your thoughts.